We're here with Dr. Nicole Nisly, my wife Mary, and we're here to talk about something that's pretty important to us and maybe important to a lot of our fellow Iowans and patients. Several years ago, we had the situation where our then son came out as transgender, and we're here to answer questions and try to hopefully make that process a little easier for as many other fellow Hawkeyes as we possibly can.
So, Mary, I was wondering, as you saw your now daughter and at the time son growing up, if you knew that your child was a transgender person, or when did you first realize? Was that when they came out to you?
There was no typical story for us. I didn't have a child who was asking for Barbie dolls or sparkle costumes, which you hear a lot about, sort of a typical cultural feminine decision. We had a child who played sports, who as an early adolescent dated girls, was sensitive, I would say, and thoughtful, more than maybe you would expect an adolescent boy to be. But other than that, nope. And actually, when she came out to me, I was in Los Angeles. I'd gone there to take her to Target. And she said, "While you're here, I have something to tell you, and I want you to guess." So we played 20 questions. I thought of every awful scenario that a sophomore in college would tell you. And it was no, 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 nope. And then she told me. And honestly, I didn't know what she was talking about. I had to say, okay, now I need my computer because I'm kind of lost. So that's how it happened. And it was, I'd say we were blindsided. And maybe you beat up on yourself because of that, because you wonder, why didn't I know? Why didn't I know that she was struggling? How long has she been struggling? And she came back and said it's been something she had been thinking about since she was probably in 5th or 6th grade. Right. And we were completely unaware.
And that's very common. I hear that all the time. So, Bruce, how is it for you? You told me before your experience of her coming out to you. Can you share a little bit?
Yeah, I can only share my experiences, and when I talk to people about it, it was a complete shock. I was angry, I was frustrated, I was lost. And we should fill in a little bit more of the story. I wasn't with Mary and our daughter at the time, and so she calls. And I think you had a conversation with her saying, well, she wanted to tell me face to face, and you said you couldn't sit on this, and so you called me that evening. And I was just completely befuddled. And I had a piece of me was really angry. A piece of me was, I felt, and I guess I should say, our daughter and I have always been relatively close for a lot of reasons. And for me not to know that, I felt like this couldn't be. It was surreal. And so I was somewhat upset at myself, but I was really let down by her. And I carried that for quite a while, maybe jumping ahead in the story, but it probably took me better part of 6 months or more. And subsequently we had face-to-face conversations. And I would say in there, that first face-to-face conversation for me was very important, because I needed to understand why, in my terms, that she was lying. Why living two lives? And we had to talk that through. And then as we're talking it through, it started dawning on me that for her to come out to Mary and to have such a frank conversation with me, almost more mature than me in being able to handle this, I thought, well, first of all, she's serious. This isn't some fantasy and just playing around in the fringes. And the second thing I thought is how much she trusts us and how much she's reaching out almost at that moment, asking us to be part of her life, regardless of how she identifies herself, and wanting us to support her moving forward. And that was really cathartic for me, but it was troubling.
And then, Mary, how was it for you thinking about You know, I have a son that I've seen since they were a baby. And now this son is transitioning, and now I'll have a daughter, but I'm in a way losing a son. Can you share a little bit about that?
I cried a lot. But I also, I always knew it didn't matter on some level because your kid is your kid.
Right.
And that's sort of where you have to start. And that I read a lot of things when this happened. I have stacks. But one thing that has stuck with me was a mom who said, at the end of the day, you love your child because they breathe. That's it. That's your starting point. Yes. The rest you figure out. You do. I mean, but I was the first one to take her shopping. I was like, if you're going to do this, I'm not going to let you make miscalculations on what that's going to look like. We're going to figure this out. Yes. And, but she was the brave one. She went to the administration at her college and told them, and they determined that her dorm would then become co-ed.
And this is I'm sorry. This is so she was living with a male.
She was in an all-male dorm.
It was an all-male dorm, living with another male, and the college basically said, I guess we now have our first co-ed dorm. I mean, in a sense, how accepting and how supportive could that possibly be? And it wasn't, she didn't have to move, and she and her roommate had figured it out, and that's part of life.
We tend to see that with kids, they all understand each other so much better than for us older generation than they are.
And that's a good thing.
And then I have people say, my parents keep mixing the pronouns, they don't call me by the right names.
I had a really hard time shifting my pronouns. This is an individual, my entire, all the time that I've known her has been a he. And now all of a sudden I have to start referring to him as a she. That sounds really simple, and I make it sound really easy right now, but in the spur of a moment, at midnight after we're on a train coming back someplace and I want to say something, for a long time, it was completely wrong. Then I got into 50-50, and then there was a period where I really think she thought that I was doing that to actually aggravate her, which I don't think was the case at all. At one point, we had to have a conversation that, look, I'm still going through this transition. I am having a real hard time with pronouns, and you're just going to have to give me a little forgiveness here. And you're entitled to scream at me or do whatever you want to do to coach me. I had the conversation also with Mary. So I would just say on both sides of the equation, as this process unfolds, it takes a little while to get used to, and that's okay too. I actually, and Mary knows, because as I work with our students on campus, and our students have been wonderful in terms of adopting very formally he, him, his, and introducing themselves, she, her, hers. And that use of pronouns, I think, is very respectful, it's right, and I'm so glad we do that. But as I work with the community, I just tell them, I am not a good pronouner, and just bear with me. And they'll smile and they'll coach me, and I have a real hard time with they, and it's not because I'm being disrespectful, it's just not normal to refer to a
in your vernacular.
No, it's not normal in my vernacular, in the way I grew up, to refer to it as an individual in a plural way, and it's difficult. So, but that's.
We'll keep doing it.
Just keep doing it. Yeah.
I find working backwards is hardest. So if you're talking about something historical, when your child was 5, that's where you slip up. You make mistakes and you hope your kids will. Once your kids, I think, are secure that you are supportive of them, and that you're, no matter whatever they need is what you care about, then when you make mistakes, they're a lot more forgiving of them. When they are still feeling like you don't support them or you're pushing back and you make those mistakes, and it feels volatile and defeating.
But I also think part of this is just being honest about your emotions, because it's tough. And just being honest and say, it's tough. And I'm struggling here. And then maybe we can help each other and we stay together more as a family. I think the probability of depression for someone going through this process is relatively high, maybe higher than on average in the population. And we've talked to just stay positive, stay supportive, get them through this. Let's keep coming back together.
And then what about for you, Bruce, when you think about, her as a professional, in the future, did you have any worries that she would be successful, that that this transition would impact her professional life and career and family?
Yeah, I think we all live with that. I think maybe even our daughter lives with that concern. We all have that fear, particularly in this world, that somebody is going to out her and use it in a negative way. But her identity is her, and her career is her. And as parents, I think we've really gotten to the point that let's help each of our kids. We have 4 kids, we have 8 grandkids, and they're totally different, totally different. And to use one standard across them all is just not fair. We don't do that with our students here at the university. You don't do that with your patients. We stop and try to understand the context of the person we're dealing with.
Can you think of other things that you both did in terms of advocacy or just to help her in terms of, move forward?
Well, we were lucky because we lived in Boston, and Massachusetts is progressive, and that was, again, very helpful, like the university, because as far as doing the legal name change, the driver's license, the passport, the state had so many things in place that made it so simple. And we've been very lucky, and I know that. My brother's a psychiatrist. He immediately helped us find somebody at UCLA so that we had that professional contact as well for any services that we needed medically. So we had a lot of pieces that aren't necessarily as easy here as they were for us. And we're talking 7 years on, so it's kind of too bad that we're still
I think the
fighting that,
technical gender change on passports and driver's license and that is, in Massachusetts, was very easy to deal with. But I've subsequently learned that is a big issue, and it's fraught full of little nuances, state by state by state, and probably country by country. I don't know by country, but that I would argue is, I know here at the university we've tried to really bend over backwards to make it very step by step. Here's what you need to do, and if you get as I understand it, if you get the process out of kilter and you start in the wrong place, it makes it much more difficult. So I think part of the support mechanism is here is someone who now wants to identify differently. And if you're not careful, intentionally or unintentionally, the barriers get put up, and they must be incredibly frustrating for somebody who's decided they want their identity, gender identity is different. And so I would just encourage, I'm glad we here at the university really, and Len and the College of Law have made that really useful. But then there are 49 other states, and the techniques are really, really important, and it can be really frustrating.
And if you come from abroad and you live here, right,
Yeah.
that's another big one.
Yes.
But asking in terms of when you decided to come to the University of Iowa, for example,
Right.
and you're looking at the opportunity to be the president here, I'm sure you also think of it as a parent, insurance and so on. What were your thoughts about if you would come here and how our insurance would play out in supporting your daughter?
Well, I think just before I get to the insurance piece, there's another piece, which is I realized that this was a relatively public position, and we had a very specific conversation with our daughter saying, hey, if this comes to pass, where do you want to be in the process? Do you mind if we talk about you? Do you mind being as open to the general public as you have been with us and the rest of your siblings and the rest of the family? And we had that conversation, and she was quite supportive and understands, and she's been on campus a couple times, maybe coming again in a few weeks. And then I think the second, to answer your question now about insurance, it was a little strange for me because I've been in a number of corporations throughout my career, and actually worked at two other universities. And back in the mid-90s, I worked for an organization that supported spousal insurance, transgender support. We had it very broad, very supportive. Why? Because we're in a very competitive industry. We want anybody to work with us who we think could help us. I get here to the university to find we had some glitches in our system, and we were not nearly as supportive. And we had to do a lot of work early on. And there were a lot of really unusual barriers. I will just say people had made up that, oh, it's going to cost a lot more to support trans. It didn't cost us any more as a university, not a nickel more. It was just, we just needed to change the policy. Second issue was we're going to blow back from the rest of the state politically. And I can keep going, but you know what? No, we're just going to do it because it's the right thing to do. That's who we are. Those are our values. And we've been fortunate enough to have the region support us and the rest of the state, and here we are. And I think it's absolutely the right thing to do, not only because it's the right thing to do, because it makes us a more attractive employer and people want to stay here.
Yes. And then when you think about the joys, I mean, looking on the other side, now your daughter has transitioned, she has grown, all these things have happened. How is it now? Just watching her live her life, you know, and be congruent with who she is.
That part's good. She has a partner. They have shared goals. And you just want to know that your kid can be loved separate from you as an adult. And that's a really wonderful thing to see. So, yeah, it's a good thing.
And I didn't feel like there was any barrier. That was in our relationship before she came out. And that was and I had to get over that because that's part of the problem I had to deal with to redevelop my trusted relationship with our daughter. But once we've gotten over it, I would actually argue that in many ways our relationship is even deeper. We have a much broader ability to confront issues with one another. I mean, there's probably, in some senses, other than maybe death, this is pretty serious. And to have that dialogue and to have your feeling like you've been lied to for quite a while, and then coming to the realization that if I don't find a way to support her, I may not have a relationship with her. I couldn't have fathomed that. So once you get through that, you start realizing, wow, this is a pretty broad and deep relationship, and that's pretty special. And I think it makes our family, as a group, even her siblings, have been very supportive.
And it was a rocky road. We won't say that it wasn't.
They went through the same,
I mean,
like
different
we did.
degrees, completely different, but also on the upside, as much as you spend a lot of energy worrying about telling people how you're going to share it, I'm not going to put it on Facebook, that's not me. So it was one by one. It was so much better than I could have ever anticipated. So where the spots where it was rocky, where there were things to work out, those were hard, but the greater group was so supportive that it was much better than whatever you tell yourself in your head. It's much better. And I have to address the lied thing because my perspective, and I know that's how Bruce felt it, I never thought my child lied to me. I just have to say that because I felt like she didn't fully know herself. She wasn't doing anything. Lying is a sort of a deliberate process, I think. And when you're trying to figure out who you are and not sharing that because, first of all, you're told culturally that whatever you're thinking or toying around with isn't real, then how do you acknowledge in yourself that it might be something that's negatively portrayed? The good news is that we are moving to some degree beyond that, and culturally we're seeing a shift and better representation, positive representations. Everything isn't negative now, so hopefully that's a continued path that we are as a society.
And I view the process more black and white. At some point she must have known.
Of course.
And she wasn't sharing that with me. And I had to work through that. And I don't think there are rights and wrongs. I think that the one thing I think Mary and I have talked about this privately, just the two of us several times, is as long as we're talking, as long as we're having experiences of traveling together and celebrating holidays and coming back together as a family, as long as we're continuing to talk, we're in a good place, even if some of the conversations are hard. And I went through a period where I was trying not to have that conversation. And it was really me, more than Mary, but also more than our daughter. But then once we got into it, it was useful, really powerful. I think the other piece that I was going to say a few seconds ago is when you took her out to shop, and then she started applying makeup. She really applied the makeup.
Second adolescence.
Yeah, and it was like, and you're intervening to help coach her. Do you really want to look like that, or do you? And it was really, and it must have been tough, but it was the right thing to do, and our daughter really appreciated it.
Sometimes, not always.
At the end of the day.
And if you were sitting with a couple whose child is beginning their transition and you're talking to them right now, do you have any final words that if you were talking to them you would share? Besides all your whole wonderful story that you just did.
For me, it was self-education. Read everything you can get your hands on. You won't like all of it, but I think if you're a person of faith, you need to read about the stories from people of faith who have found a way to keep their faith and move beyond the limitations, perhaps, of their church. If you love your child, you need to do that. If it isn't about faith, if it's just about your confusion about gender and your vision of what gender means, education helps. The more you know helps. And also there are organizations out there, and there are parents that are going through it, and sometimes you don't realize that. And once you see that there are, that helps too, I think.
It's not easy, and it's okay. You're going to be a little taken back early on, and you're going to be confused. And perhaps each of us is confused in a different way. And that may be just part of the process, and that's okay to be confused. My second piece of advice is don't use that confusion to avoid the conversations, and don't avoid the rebuilding, in some cases, a relationship. And I think that's very, very important. And then I would finally say at the end of the day, for me, it was just really simple. I love her, and I want to have her in my life forever, and as simple as that. And maybe as a parent, my role is to do all I can to support her, and that's a two-way street. But it's like trust. How do you build trust? Someone has to take the first step. And I think in our case, we were both taking the steps together, and it's been really wonderful. But don't give up. Don't give up at all. It's doable.